Welcome one more time. My name is Dr. Cihan Çobanoğlu. I'm the president of Association of North America Higher Education International, also the McKibben Endowed Chair Professor at the University of South Florida in the College of Hospitality and Tourism. As I told you today, we have Professor Ravi Dhar. Before we start with his lecture, I would like to go over a few slides, housekeeping slides with you, and then we will be able to start with his lecture. First of all, I would like to introduce you to ANAHEI, as short we are calling it, Association of North America Higher Education International. This is a non-profit organization registered in the state of Florida, and it is the mission of ANAHEI is to promote and encourage a global culture at member institutions, globalize student and faculty success, enhance global initiatives among member institutions, deepen global engagement. The website for ANAHEI, as many of you have probably know, to register for this webinar is anahei.org. It is a not-for-profit organization, and you can be a member if you are not already for free of charge. Programs of ANAHEI, just to summarize them, we have Visiting Scholars Program, which is introducing scholars around the world to institutions around the world so they can spend a semester, a year, etc. We also have partnership programs among institutions, so we are kind of like a matchmaking between different universities in different countries. And again, the information about those can be found on our website. We have journals, and we also have conferences. As a matter of fact, we are going to have a conference just today. It's starting, and I will tell a little bit about that. We also have awards and obviously distinguished lecture series, which we are inaugurating with Professor Ravi Dhar today. Two journals that ANAHEI has: International Interdisciplinary Business Economics Advancement Journal. ibajournal.org is the website, and we also have Journal of Global Education and Research. Journal.anahei.org is the website. They are open access, which means that it doesn't cost anything for the authors to submit, and also same thing for the readers to read. We have several conferences. The one that is starting today, which we are fortunate to host it at University of South Florida, Sarasota Manatee, is the Global Conference on Education and Research. Glosser.org is the website. And we also actually, Professor Ravi Dhar was normally scheduled to speak at the 7th International Interdisciplinary Business Economics Advancement Conference, which you see here. We were going to hold it in Istanbul, Turkey, but unfortunately got canceled. Therefore, now we are fortunate to have him here as a distinguished lecture speaker. We also start another new conference, which is in my opinion, very innovative, Graduate Student Research Conference in Business and Economics. That's going to also take place this week on Thursday and Friday at the University of South Florida, Sarasota Manatee. Last but not least, we have Global Conference on Services Management, which is going to take place this October in Volterra, which is in the heart of Tuscany, Italy. And the websites for both conferences are listed here, gradconference.org and glosser.org. Okay, before we start our lecture, I would like to introduce our guest distinguished lecturer, Professor Ravi Dhar. I met with him. I was fortunate enough to attend his seminar at Yale University last year. And again, I thank him for accepting our invitation and giving this lecture despite that he's got a cold. He is the George Rogers Clark Professor of Management and Marketing and the Director of Center for Customer Insights at the Yale School of Management at Yale University. He also has an affiliated appointment as Professor of Psychology in the Department of Psychology, Yale University. As you can read here in the introduction, and you will see if you don't know already, he's an expert in consumer behavior and branding, marketing management and marketing strategy, and leader in bringing psychology insights to the study of consumer decision making. This is the reason why we invited him to International Interdisciplinary Business Advancement Conference that we have, because he's a true interdisciplinary researcher. His research focuses on using psychological principles such as limited self-control and cognitive limitations in processing information to investigate fundamental aspects about the formation of consumer preferences and goals in order to understand consumer behavior in the marketplace. Please join me welcome Professor Ravi Dhar. Dr. Dhar, now the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen so you can all see it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Let me know if you see my screen. Yeah.
Yep, we can see your screen. I'm going to make sure that I will bring it here. Kim, please.
Great, thank you. So today what I'm going to do is take you through a framework, that we have developed over the last 10 years or so to understand how consumers make choices. So it's not very complicated, but what you see in behavioral economics is there's a lot of individual effects, but there's no overarching systematic framework to understand people's choices. So the main goal of this was for managers to develop a framework so that managers understand what are the three drivers of making choices. So the three drivers that I'm going to talk about today are beliefs, goals, and heuristics or choice heuristics, and take you through that. And so that any type of choice you make, these are the three things that really matter. And of course, if you look at what's on the mind of the top marketing leaders, getting insights into their consumers is one of the top 5. This is a study that was done by McKinsey. Similar studies are done by BCG or IBM. And so brand is very important in marketing, but so is getting insights, analytics, digital, and customer experience. Today I'm going to focus on the second of this, which is the insights idea. So why is understanding consumers difficult? This is a statement that was made more than 30 years ago by David Ogilvy, who said, customers don't know what they feel, don't say what they know, and don't do what they say. That makes marketing research really difficult. So I changed this a little bit. It's not that customers don't know what they feel. It's customers don't know what they feel at the moment and don't say what they know at the moment. And so in behavioral economics, the way we like to think about it is the things you think at the moment, the things you feel at the moment has a big effect on your choices. So in theory, you look at all the information and you decide, but we have seen in the field that really what matters is not everything that you think about, but what's salient at the moment. So let me show you some examples, what I mean by that. So if you look at this example, I was talking to somebody, who was consulting for ADT, the security company. And so if you ask consumers, how do they decide which security services to use? They'll say all the usual things, the service, the features, the price. So I'll take into account all information and decide. But if you actually looked at what people did, what really matters is when did people buy this? People typically bought this if there was a robbery in the neighborhood. So somebody's house got robbed in your neighborhood. If that happens, you want to get it right away. So the real decision was based on who can install it right away and was not based on the price and other features. So this is an important point. What says is stated preferences often downplay the salient goals. So when you ask in stated preferences, how do you choose a security system, people will tell you many features. But if you look at how do they actually decide, it's based on only one or two features that are salient at the time. So the things you think at the moment, the things you feel at the moment has a big effect. Similarly here, if you ask people, would you work harder for $100 or would you work harder for $100 bottle of wine? Most people are rational and said they would work harder for $100 because with the money they can buy the wine if they need. So I'll always work harder for $100 than $100 bottle of wine. But if you look at what happens in practice, if half the people you pay $100 and half the people you pay a bottle of wine, and you make them do a task, who's going to stop sooner? And we find that people who are stopping sooner is people who have the money, because they can always, with wine, there's all kinds of emotions, and you really want that bottle of wine, which the money does not really do. I was at a conference when lots of senior executives, this was 3-4 years ago, were standing in line to get to get something. I said, what are you all standing in line for? And they said, oh, it's a free tablet. And these were very senior people who could buy as many tablets as they needed in their company. But clearly, when you give something interesting and fun and new, it sort of has an emotional reaction, and stated preferences downplay emotions, whereas your actual choices are driven by emotions. So that's the second thing. So the first is stated preferences downplay salient goals. What are you thinking at the moment? Stated preferences also downplay what you're feeling at the moment. And finally, if you go back to the definition, consumers don't do what they say, which is the importance of measuring behavior. And this is a big change in the last 5 or 10 years, that if you measure only intent, the behavior might be different from intent in many cases. So here's an example of StubHub, which is an online concert website. And when they asked the consumers, what can we change? Consumers said, we don't like the fact that you have hidden fees, you charge all this service charge. Why don't you put it all together, make it transparent? We like transparency. As soon as they made it transparent, the sales dropped around 30%. So what the important point here is that consumers are not lying to us when they say they want something. The important point here is consumers don't have an insight into their own behavior of how they will react to certain information. And if you think about it, why should consumers have an insight into their behavior? Because then you would not have a field called psychology, because consumers would just tell you how they would react under, when they feel angry, when they're, doing under time pressure. So consumers have a theory of how they'll react, but the theory is often incorrect. And so that's why the importance of measuring behavior is a stated intent is often different from, the purchase intent, actual intent. So having given you sort of 3 reasons why studying consumers is challenging, let me give you a definition which I'm going to use to help with the framework. So an insight is uncovering the true reasons for consumer behavior based on their unstated cognitions, emotions, and motivations. What does that mean? Unstated cognitions means what they think, emotions is what they feel, and motivations is what they desire. And so these are all unstated because they're inside you, but that leads to your behavior. So we as a researcher need to understand the unstated behavior, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and what they desire, but ultimately we're interested in their choice or behavior. So here's another example. One of the most successful, credit card launches in the US in 2007 and 8 was Keep the Change card. This was launched by Bank of America. And if you don't know this card, every time you spend the money, they would put some money in your savings account. So let's say you spend $9.80, 20 cents is left over. They would round it off and put the 20 cents in your savings account. And for the 90-day period when the card was launched, they would double it. So you would have 40 cents. So basically, it was called Keep the Change card because every time you spend money, it also allowed you to save money. And the question becomes, why was the card so successful? And that gets into the definition, which is if you understand consumer behavior, every time they're spending the money, they're feeling guilty. And anything that helps to reduce the guilt, in this case by saving, can make it easy to spend. And so I'm going to use this card over my other cards because this card makes me feel less guilty when I spend. So small idea like that can have a big impact on the success of the credit card because it was based on a true consumer insight. So where do you use consumer insights? So basically you can use it for any marketing question, from price, brand building, advertising, positioning. And of course, you can use it outside marketing also for, people have used it for, supply chain, with the retail customers, how to behave in a certain way. So it's become very exciting. The reason for that is that people have started using behavioral economics for changing behavior for many different types of stakeholders, not just consumers or customers. The model I'm going to take you, framework I'm going to take you through today has three components to it: beliefs, goals, and choices, which, as I said, are the three factors that drive our choices. So these are the three pillars, if you like. And so I'll spend around 10, 15 minutes on each of them to help you get the overall picture. So let's start with beliefs. So basically the idea is when consumers make a choice, they bring a set of beliefs that impact their preferences, right? You already have some kind of belief when you're making a choice, and that impacts what you end up doing. So take an example here. On the right, you have a very successful product, Tropicana. Everybody knows the brand, was doing well. And then on the left, we launched a new brand by Minute Maid called Simply Orange. It was a new brand, and new brands in a strong market have a hard time succeeding, but very quickly, the brand seemed to have done very well. So what's going on here really? Why did the brand do so well? If you did a blind taste test, people said both the brands are, equally tasty, pure, natural. But when you did the test as in the bottles, in the package, the one on the left was seen as more pure, more natural, more authentic than the one on the right. And so if you look at what's going on, there's a lot of things that are going on. People say it could be the name, make it seem more, it's only orange. It could be the shape of the bottle. It could be the transparent bottle. It could be the green cap, which means healthy. But my broader point is these are all beliefs. This is not your actual experience of the product. Its actual experience of the product is the same, but beliefs are very different. And so we haven't spent enough time understanding beliefs and how beliefs drive our preferences. If you look at an example very common to us, we have OTC products that have generics, but many of us still buy the Tylenol as opposed to the generic. If you look at the data, who buys the generic, it's often the doctors and not the average consumers, doctors and nurses, pharmacists. And so the general idea here is that people believe that the branded ones are better than the generic ones. And this was done for other types of categories also, like buying products for the party, store brand versus non-store brand. And again, experts were more likely to buy the store brand than non-experts. Beliefs not only drive evaluation, beliefs drive experience, right? If I tell you this wine is $100 or this wine costs $10, when I serve it to you, those I say that it's $100, you enjoy the wine, you think it's really good. Those I say it's $10, they don't like the wine, they say it doesn't taste very good. This study was also done under fMRI, which is, when you put your head in a scan. And if you look at the bar graph on the left, without price, there's no difference between the taste of the wine for many of these wines. If you look on the right, the $10 and $90, once you have the price, the taste is very different. So this is not only what people tell you, this is the neurons in their brain. They're firing differently when they think they're drinking a $10 bottle of wine or a $90 bottle of wine, even though it's the same wine in both cases. So that's the power of beliefs. This is from the most recent election of Trump. When, if you look at the A, which is the Trump's inaugural versus Obama's first inaugural, and people were asked which photo has more people, thankfully only 20% of the people said the one in A, but that tells you the power of beliefs. Even when it's so clear that that the number of people are higher in B, 20% still said A, and that gives you a sense of how important beliefs are and the power of beliefs. Beliefs also drive expectations. If you give people the wine and it looks like white wine, and then on the right you add a pigment to it so that it looks red. So everybody is drinking white wine, but half the people think they're drinking red wine. And then you ask them to describe the wine, and you notice the language that people use. When they think they're drinking white wine, is the language of white wine. When they think they're drinking red wine, it's the language of red wine. So beliefs also drive your expectations. Another study was done with keys. They were told it's a German key or a Spanish key. And then if they thought it's a German key, they used words that are much more masculine, hard, useful, metallic. If they thought it was Spanish key, they used much more feminine words, little, lovely, tiny. So this is the power of beliefs, right? So the key is identical, the wine is identical, but beliefs are very different. Beliefs drive expectations, right? So the question is, if you look at in many of the decisions we make, we don't have information to make decisions, so we often rely on beliefs. And what I'm not going to spend as much time today is really how do you change beliefs, or what beliefs do you bring, because that tells you that the research has not studied beliefs enough. So if you look at Trump here, he says, I'm really rich. And what he's trying to tell people is, I'm really smart, because in this country, when you say I'm really rich, it means you must be really smart, or I'm not a politician. Politicians are all talk. So this whole notion that beliefs are important in decisions, and companies don't spend enough time thinking about how do I change beliefs, is kind of interesting to me, that it has been relatively understudied. As I said, changing beliefs is really important. When I was in China many times, the single biggest question they have is, how do I change beliefs? My product is just as good as the product from US or product from Switzerland, but even the Chinese customers does not want to buy it because they think the quality is not going to be as good. So it's not about changing the product or changing the quality, it's about changing the beliefs. And so we know much less about how to change beliefs than we know about how to change products. So this is kind of an interesting topic and surprisingly, less studied. So just to summarize around beliefs, the first driver of choice is this idea that you have to find out, what beliefs do you want to highlight, which is reinforce the beliefs, or you want to highlight different beliefs. So for example, people think Tesla is very good for the environment, but SUVs are not good for the environment, And so what are the right beliefs that I want to highlight so that the choice will become easier for people? And the final is changing the beliefs, which is the hardest, because once the beliefs are there, they're very hard to change it. And so the question becomes, how do you change beliefs? I'll skip that for now and go to the next section, which is the second driver of choice, is goals. Let me talk a little bit about what goals are. So people have multiple goals. They have goals to save, to enjoy, to eat healthy, and to eat tasty. You have many goals, but at any given time, only one goal is salient. So now you're on the webinar, your goal to learn is salient. If you're doing something else, your other goal will be salient, to do my, paper, write my paper, attend a conference, socialize. And so it's like bounded rationality. We have many goals, but only one or two goals are salient at a time. And so good helping people make choices means I have to identify what goal is salient so I can message to that. Let me talk briefly about why goals are important, because often companies use the idea of, needs, and economists might talk about utility. But there are a couple of interesting things about goals, and let me highlight that. So one is, not all goals are active all the time. In the morning, you might think healthy. In the evening, you might think indulgence. So your different goals are active at different times. The second interesting thing is goals are not activated only by the person. It's not dispositional. It's not static. It can be activated by the environment. So if I see somebody eating healthy, that can activate my health goal. If I see somebody going to the gym, that can activate my goal to exercise. So that's interesting because it means it's not a need that's internal to me, but just seeing somebody do certain things can make me want to do that also. And the third thing that's important is goals are represented. How goals are represented can impact motivation, right? So the needs are sort of fixed, but goals says you can represent them in many different ways, and that can impact motivation. So if I say lose 20 pounds, that's very hard. But if I say lose 2 pounds a month, it's the same goal to lose 20 pounds, but now it's easier to motivate me. Similarly, goals can be represented visually versus verbally. And if you show visually that cigarettes kill you, or verbally you say cigarettes kill you, they have a different effect. So the language of goals really allows you to think about the motivation in a very different sense than needs or utility allows to do. And what I'm going to show you is how goals is a second pillar that drives choices. As I said, goals can be primed by the environment. If I see some healthy magazines on the shelf, suddenly I go to the store and buy something healthy. It's an unconscious activation. Goals can be activated by time of day. Morning, most of us want to eat something healthy, but by the evening, we're all having some dessert and so forth. And the most important area in which goals have been used is for messaging, right? So if I have to message to you, I really need to figure out when are you thinking about my product? And that's very hard because if you're not thinking about the goal, that advertising is potentially wasted now. So here's an example of laundry detergent. When are you thinking about laundry detergent? Most of the time we are not thinking about laundry, but one time we are is when we might be doing our own laundry. So how do I reach you when you're doing your laundry? And so the question is, what Procter & Gamble decided is, this was in Beirut, Lebanon. They advertised on top of buses, so when people were drying their clothes, they could look down from the balcony and they could see a message for a detergent made by P&G, which can say, if you use the product, it'll be cleaner, cheaper, whatever is the message that you want to do. Goals can also be activated, and then you can provide the solution. So one is to find when is your goal active, but the second is how do you activate that goal? And here's an example. If you sit on the bus stand, your weight appears on the scale. So the blue box is really a scale, and your weight appears, and then you get a discount to the gym, which is right next door. So if I gave you the discount to the gym right away, it would have no effect. But once your weight appears, your goal is active, I need to exercise, and then it's more effective. That's the idea of a goal, which is when the goal is active, you're much more likely to pay attention to the information and act on it. Let me play this video that allows you to see how it works, how a goal is active. This is in Hong Kong. When it's raining, they're trying to make you go to Philippines for a vacation. So the general idea is that when the goal is, when you think about sunny, when it's rainy, and then if we get the message at that time, it's going to be much more effective than at any other time. And Grubhub, weather is a good way to do it. Grubhub does it every time it rains now. I get a message from them. Do you want to stay in and order your food? You don't have to go out in the rain. And that can be quite effective just as it's raining. The goals can be different in terms of shopping and consumption, right? The goals when we shop are different than when we are actually consuming the products. And so understanding what are the goals in the supermarket versus the store is kind of interesting. If you look at the placement, when Colgate wanted to put a traveling toothbrush and they put it in the toothbrush section, the goal was not active and people would not buy it. If you put it in the traveling section, then the sales went up. But many stores don't have a traveling section. So the challenge was, what's the right location for? Where do we put, where's the goal more active? Similarly, when Walmart was selling life insurance, they didn't know where to put it. Should we put it with cash cards, where we have the Visa cards, or should we put it in the baby section because people have, that's the section they're thinking about insurance. So it's a test and learn idea. But the general idea is, when is the goal active? Because that will get people to be more likely to buy it. As I said, there's only one goal active at a time, but consumers also hold multiple conflicting goals. Sometimes they want to save, but they also want to spend. They want to eat healthy, but they also want to eat indulgent food. Here's an example of somebody going to the gym, but he's too lazy to take the stairs and is taking the elevator, right? So people do this all the time. We don't know much about conflicting goals. What we do know is that combining two goals is a very effective way of changing people's behavior. So getting people to exercise, if they can watch television, is an easy way to get them to exercise, because then they feel, I'm not feeling guilty about watching television, and also I'm getting my exercise. So some people have a rule that they will only watch TV when they're exercising, otherwise they will not watch TV, sort of trying to change their behavior, if you like. There's a version of this study done where somebody approached you with two baskets, the one on the left, and offered you chocolates or carrots. Or somebody approached you with the basket on the right, which had also chocolate and carrots, but in one basket. And what they found is when it was together, people took many more chocolates and they took a little bit of carrots. You felt less guilty taking the chocolates. Whereas on the one on the left, you didn't take, you did not take much chocolate because you felt that it was a different thing and I should not be doing it. So what we know about multiple goals is that people often try to balance, but we don't know much about what balancing means, that you have to achieve both goals to the same extent or slightly. So for example, people might eat 4 slices of pizzas and insist on a Diet Pepsi or a Diet Coke. And you feel better even though you already had so many calories, but psychologically you feel much better. The last pillar is, of course, the choice heuristics, the one that is most associated with behavioral economics. This idea that when people are making choices, they're using some kind of heuristics. They're not looking at all the information in making a decision. And what we know from the last, 10 years or so, we call it System 1 and System 2, the idea that when we make choices, we have two systems. They're not two systems in the head, but it's like two systems, that are operating. System 1 is automatic, fast, and emotional. System 2 is slow, deliberative, analytical, thoughtful. And so the general idea is not that people are System 1 type or System 2 type, but all of us are both System 1 and System 2 type. We do both. So if you do both System 1 and System 2, then of course what happens is, what produces the response first? System 1, because System 1 is fast. Once the System 1 produces a response, System 2 has to decide whether it wants to put in the effort. And so what the research shows is, most of the time, System 2 is either lazy. If you don't like the word lazy, think about it as multitasking. System 1 provides a response. System 2 doesn't bother to generate a response. So another way of saying that is most of the time we decide based on system 1 and not system 2. And so here's an example of that. If you ask somebody who's likely to have killed somebody, many people choose the one in the middle, who's a professor at Caltech in behavioral economics. And that's system 1. People don't think, they immediately come to that. So what's interesting here is system 1 generates the response immediately. And even if you decided to apply system 2 and thought carefully, hard, and much more, it's not clear what system 2 would do. So as I said, many times system 1 is the response that people go by because system 2 doesn't really help you make the decision here. Now, there are times when system 1 doesn't generate a response. So if you have 17 times 24, system 1 doesn't generate a response. Nothing comes to mind. You have to actually do the math to be able to find what it is. But as I said, system 2 is also lazy. Like, unlike in the first case when I asked you who's the serial killer, in this case, most of you will not even bother to do the math because you don't have to do it. So there are cases when system 2 decides, but oftentimes people will not bother to do it. So the general idea here is system 1 is a dominant way of thinking for many types of decisions. System 1 and system 2 can produce different judgments, and then you often go with system 1. So if you look at this here, which table is longer? Most people think one on the left, and if I take it and make it go and show you it's the same, you still go with your system 1 judgment and say that it's the one on the left because system 1 is so powerful in people's mind. So the big lesson here is in communication, you have to make sure that you have a system 1 appeal, not system 2 appeal. Here's an example of system 2 appeal, all kinds of reasons why the product is better. And here's a system 1 appeal of why you should use Michelin tires. And you see that in many different things. Gillette with system 1 appeal on the left, system 2 appeal, system 1 appeal. One of the most successful financial services product in the last 10 years has been something called the Target Date Fund. This is like buying a mutual fund which has the date of your retirement on it. So if it's, it'll say like 2040 if you don't retire in 2040. And if you look at the returns of this, it performs below the S&P 500, which is not surprising because it's has some bonds, not just stocks in it. But people love it because it makes the decision easier. So when I first came to know about this fund, I was kind of impressed that the industry has done a very nice job of simplifying what's a very complicated decision to help you decide how to make your asset allocation. One thing that people often mistake is that system 1 is biased and system 2 is rational. Both systems are biased, they're just biased in different ways. What system 1 is biased about is by relying on intuitions, what comes to mind immediately. System 2 is biased by doing a lot of effort, but it's making comparisons. And comparisons can make you move in directions that are not necessarily, better for you. So for example, when we have these 3 prices of a gas, we know that people often buy the middle one. Why do they buy the middle one? The cheap one seems too cheap, the expensive one seems too expensive, middle seems right. So you're putting in the effort, you're trying to decide, but it's not really rational. So both system 1 and system 2 are biased, but they're biased in sort of different ways. And so here's another example of comparisons. If I don't make any comparisons, Bounty, you'll compare it to the private label in the store, but Bounty makes you compare it to something else, like 2 huge rolls is equal to 5 regular rolls. And so they're trying to shift what comparisons to make so that if we apply system 2, you're going to say this is a great deal because this is like 5 rolls, not 2 rolls. As I said, system 1 is used most of the time. System 2 is not used as much, but particularly when you're tired mentally, system 2 is depleted. And so you're going to rely more on system 1. So when are you depleted? In the middle of in the evening, under time pressure, under distraction. So many cases when people might be depleted. We did this study to approximate depletion. We had people remember an 8-digit number in the first, or the 3-digit number, which is much easier, or a control condition which there was no number to remember. And then we made them shop in a supermarket next to Columbia. And we found when people were depleted under high load, they bought much more than under low load and control. What that means is when your system one has less self-control, and when you have less self-control, you're going to make decisions much faster. So in terms of the 3 pillars, really the first one is how do you link the value that you have to the goals, because goals are important. How do you change the beliefs? And how do you make choices easy? So these are 3 pillars of making choices. So let me stop here and see if you have any questions or not. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Professor Dhar. I now open up for questions from the audience. There is one question here from one of the audience members. This person is asking, what are your thoughts of artificial intelligence impact on consumer insights, if that has going to have any impact in your opinion?
So I think if you look at artificial intelligence or machine learning and other types of things, it's certainly generating a lot of data, and most of it is correlational. It's not causal. So I think you still need to really understand the why. And I think it's much harder to get the why from artificial intelligence, but they're very good at getting patterns. They identify a lot of interesting patterns. So I think it's very promising, but it's still an early stage in terms of understanding the whys of what people do.
Perfect. Thank you. And any other questions, please type them in either question answer or in the chat section that I will be able to read. Just 1 second. Chat section is here. One question, Professor Dhar, is what are the streams of research, future research, in your opinion, in this area?
So there can be plenty. I think one question that interests me is about spending. How do people decide how much to spend in a hotel? Many people who spend like $2,000 on a suit will not spend, $50 on a pair of socks. Or they'll go to a hotel for $250, but they say $500 is too much. And I said, what do you mean too much? If you enjoy it, why is it too much? And somehow there's a psychological pain of payment, we call it, pain of paying for things. And that varies for things. So for example, it's hard to pay for airlines when you're traveling business class because the flight is over in 6 hours and it feels like I'm paying 3 times as much. So understanding, lots of understanding of how people pay for things, what matters, is kind of interesting questions. Of course, there are many questions that are potentially interesting here.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm just trying to have a little bit technical difficulty here. Let's see. Just 1 second, please. Oh. My screen shows here. Please allow me 1 second, try to fix this problem. Okay, I'm gonna go into... Okay, there is one. Okay, one question, Professor Dhar. Do easy store returns make impulse buying less costly?
Less costly for whom? To the consumer, you mean, or?
The person who asked the question, can you please tell to consumer?
Yes, I think the easy returns, companies have recognized that free shipping is not as effective as free returns, because when you say free returns, that makes it easier for people to order many more things and then they can return some of it. And we know from psychological principles that once you get it, you might keep many of the things. So people order 4 pairs of shoes and they might keep 2 or 3. And so yes, having free returns is much more effective than free shipping.
Perfect. That's great. Another question. Professor, do you think all 3 are important equally, or one of the 3 is more dominant with regards to the consumer decision making? I think it's asking about beliefs.
Goals and choices. Yeah, I think beliefs is really a big driver in many cases, because if you think about your decision, let's say medical decisions, right? It's all about beliefs. You don't really know how good the doctor will do, and you rely on beliefs. You look at where did they go to graduate school, where did they study medicine? How useful is that? But we don't know, but we rely on beliefs all the time for many types of decisions.
Perfect. Another question. We already asked that question. Will increased use of product reviews make system 2 choices less costly? For example, Simonson-Rosen, absolute value.
Yes, so I think the question is what kind of products, because for many products there's still still not enough reviews. We mentioned the hospital, but even if you go to the supermarket. But for other type of products, when you're buying a juicer or a blender, I think it's got to have an effect. But now you listen to the millennials, they say they don't even trust the reviews, because when they go to Yelp, they give a review based on the restaurant gave them a free dessert or a free appetizer. And so more and more I'm hearing from the millennials that they don't trust the word of mouth anymore. And so that raises an interesting question. What do they trust if the word of mouth is also going to be contaminated?
Perfect. One more question. Is system 1, system 2 decision-making process more, less, or the same across generations? And does messaging format, text, photo, video, tend to drive one system process over the other?
It's a good question on generations. And the question we get often is across cultures. Unfortunately, we don't know much about how these system 1 and 2 vary across cultures or generations. So it should be a topic of research. And I think to the question on video, yes, anything visual will drive system 1. So I think if you show a picture of a house with a nice view and the square footage is in text, people will focus on the view much more, because system 1 is automatic and intuitive.
Okay. The other question, there's one more question. Can you talk, please, about effective methods for changing beliefs or promoting more environmentally sustainable behaviors?
That's a great question. As I said earlier, that will require a lot of discussion, because it's one of the most challenging one. And the way to think about it is, as my colleague likes to say, if you try to change behavior through system 1, not system 2, what that means is you have to make it easy and you have to make it fun, as opposed to it's inform people what it means to change behavior. Because if you make it easy and fun, people are more likely to do it. That's a system 1 response, as opposed to telling people how the environment is suffering and how important it is. Changing behavior through changing attitudes is much more difficult in many cases.
Great. Professor Dhar, one more question. I'm doing ethics research. In that field, some scholars also argue that intuition comes first, then reasoning kicks in. I guess reasoning is similar to system 2 reflection. Asking what you think about this.
Yes, there's some work on this by, Jonathan Haidt, who's at NYU. He talks about this, which is, your Ethic is related to your response to, something is disgusting or inappropriate. And oftentimes that's a very system 1 response. It's not a system 2. And then, of course, system 2 might kick in, try to rationalize your responses.
Great. Any other questions? Audience, please type them. Okay, let's see. I also want to check with the audience if there is any questions that you sent, but I missed it. If you did, just please type there so I can address them. So, looking at this. Okay, I don't see any other questions.
Great, thank you.
Professor Dhar, thank you so much for your time and this amazing lecture. Despite the fact that you have a cold, we can hear from your coughs from time to time, but we do really appreciate it. And the audience also joined me saying thank you to you. So have a wonderful day. And all of you who joined, thank you so much for coming to Distinguished Lecture Series for ANAHEI. We hope to see you in a future Distinguished Lecture Series. And Professor Dhar, one more time, have a wonderful day, and all audience members, thank you. Hope to see you all soon again. Have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.